For over 400 years, the people of Scotland have passed down a story by word of mouth. A story about a family living in a remote coastal cave. They did not hunt animals. They hunted people. According to the legend, Alexander Sawney Bean, a man who gave up on honest work, along with his wife Agnes Douglas, established a dark kingdom inside Benenhead Cave, accessible only at low tide. Over 25 years, the clan grew into a large family of 45 to 48 people, all born from incest, all surviving by abducting, killing, and eating unfortunate travelers, passing through the desolate road between Girvan and Ballantrae. The number of victims, more than 1,000. The story ends with King James VI of Scotland personally leading an army of 400 men and a pack of hunting dogs to track down the clan. After capture, all were executed barbarically without trial. The men had their limbs amputated and were left to bleed to death. The women burned alive like witches. But there is one major problem. No legal records exist, no judgments, no execution records, no missing persons lists to prove any of this ever happened. So the question arises, if Sawney Bean was the most horrific serial killer in Scottish history, why is official history completely silent? The story begins in East Lothian, about 9 miles east of Edinburgh, where Alexander Bean was born around the late 15th or early 16th century. His father was a ditcher and hedge trimmer, a hard manual labor job. Bean tried following his father's trade, but quickly realized he was not suited to honest work. Instead, he chose a different path. Together with his wife, often called Black Agnes Douglas in many versions, Bean fled East Lothian and headed to Galloway, where they discovered Benenhead Cave, a perfect hideout for their dark plans. This cave was no ordinary shelter. The tunnels stretched more than a mile underground, dark and complex like a natural maze. More importantly, the entrance flooded twice a day at high tide, making it almost inaccessible from outside. It was the perfect fortress for a criminal family. At first, Bean simply robbed travelers, but to avoid capture, he followed a simple yet ruthless rule: leave no one alive. Every victim had to die. Then the Bean family began to multiply. No marriages outside the clan. Generations were born from incest, siblings, parents, and children. The clan grew to nearly 50 people, sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, all raised in the dark cave, fed on the most horrific diet in history. Because with a growing family, Bean made a terrifying decision: eat the victim's flesh. According to accounts of the legend, the Bean clan were not clumsy thugs. They attacked with military precision. At most, they could ambush and kill up to 6 victims at once. All escape routes were blocked. No one got away. Excess meat was salted and pickled. Body parts were hung throughout the cave like in a nightmarish butcher shop. Sometimes decomposing limbs washed up on nearby shores, but no one thought to search deep inside Benenhead Cave. The missing persons list grew longer. Innkeepers were accused because their guests disappeared after leaving. Some had to close their businesses due to suspicion of murdering customers. But the real crimes remained hidden in the shadows, protected by the tide and the clan's ruthless cunning. The Bean clan's luck ended around 1600, according to some versions. They attacked a married couple riding home from a local fair. The women in the gang pulled the wife off her horse, stripped her, and disemboweled her right in front of her husband. As the desperate man fought, he watched the attackers begin eating his wife's flesh on the spot. But at that moment, a group of 20 to 30 people also returning from the fair appeared. For the first time in their history, the Bean clan found themselves outnumbered. They retreated into the cave, leaving behind the victims' bodies, dozens of witnesses, and an enraged surviving husband. The man was taken to meet the Glasgow magistrate, who, after hearing the story and cross-referencing it with a horrifyingly long missing persons list, decided to report directly to the king. King James VI, according to the legend, personally led 400 soldiers and a pack of hunting dogs to Ayrshire. After a large-scale hunt, they found the cave. The Bean clan surrendered without resistance. What they found inside was described as a scene from hell. Human bodies hanging everywhere. Body parts preserved in salt barrels, piles of bones. All 48 members were escorted to Edinburgh. No trial, no lawyers. Their crimes were deemed too abominable to require judicial process. The men had their genitals, hands, and feet cut off, then left to bleed to death while the women watched. Afterward, the 21 women were burned alive. That is the end of the Sawney Bean legend, a perfect horror story, complete with all elements: demons, incest, cannibalism, and punitive justice. The only problem, there is no evidence any of this ever happened. If Sawney Bean was truly one of the most horrific criminals in Scottish history, he would appear in royal chronicles, court records, or at least contemporary legal documents. But no, absolutely nothing. Instead, the Sawney Bean story first appeared in a very different source, the Newgate Calendar. The Newgate Calendar was not an official historical document. It was a commercial publication, a kind of 18th century penny dreadful designed to sell to the masses with sensational crime and punishment stories. Named after the infamous Newgate prison in London, it stemmed from a long tradition of selling broadsides and chapbooks at public executions. Starting in the 1670s, Newgate prison chaplains, called the Ordinary of Newgate, began publishing accounts of condemned prisoners. These included crimes, final repentances, and execution descriptions. They sold extremely well. Chaplain Paul Lorraine, who held the position from 1700, turned it into a lucrative business. With a base salary of £35 a year, he left an estate of £5,000 upon his death in 1719, all earned from selling crime broadsheets. By 1773, these stories were compiled and published as the Newgate Calendar, or the Malefactor's Bloody Register. It was one of the most popular books of the era. Alongside the Bible and John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, it was found in most English households. And it was in the Newgate Calendar that the Sawney Bean story first appeared clearly. The strange thing is, if Sawney Bean lived in the 16th or early 17th century, why did the story not appear in any text until over 150 years later? A broadside from around 1750 mentions the traditional Scottish story of Sandy Bain in the context of a case about a cat-eating murderer. But this is only a passing reference, not a detailed account. The chronicler Nathaniel Crouch, writing under the pseudonym Richard Burton, published a similar cannibalism story in Scotland in his 1696 work. But again, this is not a legal record or official document. Most importantly, nothing in Scottish legal records. No judgments, no execution records, no missing persons lists, no reports of a large-scale royal-led sweep. According to Scottish historian Louise Yeoman, this is an inexplicable gap. If King James VI had truly led 400 men to hunt a cannibal clan, there would certainly be records. The 16th to 17th century Scottish justice system was renowned for meticulously documenting cases and punishments. So why is there nothing? The absurd victim count pause and consider the number. Over 1,000 people in 25 years. That averages 40 people per year, more than 3 per month. In 16th century Scotland, a sparsely populated land, especially in coastal Ayrshire and Galloway. If thousands disappeared on the same route over 25 years, it would be a national disaster. Local authorities, nobles, merchants, all would act. There would be reports, letters, meeting minutes, but nothing. A 50-person clan hidden for decades? Imagine the logistics. 50 people need daily food. Newborn babies would cry, sick people would groan, smoke from cooking fires would rise, waste and excrement would need disposal. How could such a group live completely hidden for 25 years, just miles from villages and traveled roads? Moreover, Benane Cave really exists, and tourists can still visit when tide permits. But modern surveys found no archaeological evidence of a large group ever living there. This is the fatal point. 16th to 17th century Scotland had a carefully documented justice system, Major cases, especially mass murder or collective punishment, were recorded in court minutes, royal correspondence, and local chronicles. A collective execution of 48 people, ordered by the king himself, would be a major historical event. It would be detailed. There would be witnesses, there would be documents, but nothing. No judgments in the court of session, no royal letters mentioning the sweep, no local chronicles recording the event. How could such an atrocity leave no legal trace? So if Sawney Bean was not real, what was he? Why does the story exist? The most popular hypothesis, proposed by historian Louise Yeoman and many other scholars, is that the Sawney Bean story was English propaganda to smear the Scots. Historical context is crucial here. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, Scotland and England had severely strained relations. From Jacobite rebellions to succession conflicts, the English often sought to demean Scots in public eyes. And the word Sawney is key evidence. Sawney was not just a diminutive of Alexander. It was also a derogatory term the English used to mock Scots, similar to Paddy for Irish. In 18th century English literature and propaganda, Sawney represented the image of the barbaric, uncivilized Scot. Even the wife's name in the legend, Black Agnes, may be deliberate defamation. Agnes Randolph, Countess of Dunbar, was known as Black Agnes for her black hair and dark complexion. She was a Scottish national hero, famous for bravely defending Dunbar Castle against an English siege in 1338. Naming the wife of a cannibal Black Agnes could be a subtle way to tarnish a Scottish heroic icon. Historian Yeoman argues, it sounds like the plot of a blockbuster horror movie, and that's exactly why it was created, to sell books. But some scholars counter this theory. They point out that the Newgate calendar also contains many similar stories about English criminals. If the purpose was anti-Scottish propaganda, why the balance? Another less political hypothesis, Sawney Bean was simply a horror story created to satisfy public taste. The 18th century saw an explosion in crime and horror literature. Broadsheets, pamphlets, and chapbooks about violent crimes sold briskly. The public had an insatiable appetite for tales of murderers, executions, and sinful acts. Sawney Bean has all the elements of a perfect horror story. Cannibalism, the most primal fear. Incest, breaking social taboos. Dark cave, symbol of the subconscious. Deformed family, the most trusted thing turned nightmarish. Punitive justice, morally satisfying ending. The story follows a familiar moral warning literature pattern. People stray due to laziness and sin, fall deeper into vice, and finally face horrific consequences. The editors of the Newgate calendar, Andrew Knapp and William Baldwin, in the 1824 to 1826 edition, explicitly stated the work's purpose was to protect youth from the path of crime by illustrating the inevitable consequences of sin. Sawney Bean fits this purpose perfectly. A third possibility, there may have been a small robber band or criminal in coastal Scotland, and the story was exaggerated over time. 16th to 17th century Scottish history is full of highway robber gangs, outlaws hiding in mountains and attacking travelers. One such gang may have left a strong impression in local memory, and the story was gradually embroidered into legend. This process is not rare in history. Many famous monsters start from small, real events, then exaggerated with each retelling. Details are added. Victim numbers increase. Acts become more barbaric. By the time the story was first recorded, over a century after the alleged events, it had become a complete legend, no longer resembling the original truth, if any. Whether propaganda, horror literature, or exaggerated myth, the Sawney Bean story has endured nearly half a millennium. Why? Touching primal fear cannibalism is one of humanity's deepest taboos. It represents the complete breakdown of civilized rules. We eat animals. We do not eat each other. When that boundary is crossed, it evokes primal terror. Sawney Bean exploits this fear perfectly. Family turned nightmare. Family is supposed to be the safest place, where we are protected and loved. Sawney Bean inverts this. Family becomes the instrument of brutality sustained by incest and cannibalism. This is powerful because it subverts what we hold most sacred. The cave, symbol of the unconscious. In psychology and literature, caves often represent the subconscious, where humanity's darkest instincts lurk. The Bean clan lives underground, far from light and civilization, just like the things we try to repress in ourselves. When they are dragged into the light and punished, it is a story of society controlling its dark instincts. The most important point, Sawney Bean may not be a specific person. He is collective fear. He is what we dread could happen when humans stray from civilization. He is a warning about what can occur when we lose our humanity, and that is why the story endures. After examining all the evidence, or rather the absence of evidence, where do we stand? No legal records, no contemporary chronicles, no archaeological evidence. Nothing except a story first appearing in a cheap book 150 years after the alleged events. The most likely conclusion, based on historical analysis, Sawney Bean never existed. But there is a paradoxical truth here. There is no evidence Sawney Bean ever lived, but no one can prove he did not exist. And that is what makes the story powerful. The most frightening thing is not that a cannibal family may have existed in 16th century Scotland. The frightening thing is that humans, for 400 years, have been willing to believe it, willing to retell it, willing to add details, willing to make it part of cultural identity. Sawney Bean has become part of Edinburgh tourism. Benane Cave is still visited by the curious. The story is retold in books, films, and rock music. Director Wes Craven drew from it for the classic horror film The Hills Have Eyes in 1977. In modern popular culture, Sawney Bean still lives. Metal bands write songs about him. Japanese manga named two titans after Sawney and Bean. Writers continue to recreate the story with new variations. Sawney Bean teaches us a profound lesson about how history and myth intertwine. There are figures that history cannot confirm, but collective memory cannot erase. They exist in a liminal space between truth and imagination, between history and literature, between event and symbol. Sawney Bean may not be real, but the fear he represents, the fear of barbarism hidden just beneath the thin veneer of civilization, is completely real. And that is why the story still matters. So if Sawney Bean is just a legend, how many other monsters were born from fear and power? How many stories we believe are history are actually ghosts of collective anxieties? That is the question Sawney Bean leaves us. Not about the 16th century, but about how we understand the past, the present, and ourselves.